Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Flame University's Founders Talk webinar series. We've been running this since last July, and we've had some great speakers come in and share their learnings, insights, their knowledge, their experience with us. My name is Darshan Doshi. I'm the founding director for the Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation at Flame University. At Flame University, we run various initiatives. One is called the Flame Origins Program, which is for revenue positive startups who have revenues between 5 lakhs to a crore. It's an equity-free, tuition-free program. YourStory has helped us build the outreach for that program as well. And we've had 19 startups go through it. Some of them have raised funding. Most importantly, all of them on an average have increased their revenues 2.5x time, right? So which is a true measurement of an accelerator program. The second is an incubator program. And an incubator program is not only open to the Flame University students, but we open it to any students in any part of the world. And thanks to COVID, we went virtual, and we have had 67 participants go through the incubator program right now. And some of them are doing great work. They'll be showcasing their work either end of March, early April. So that should be fun and an entrepreneurship summit that you guys can look out for. And then more recently, we launched a full-fledged one-year postgraduate program in entrepreneurship and innovation. Even in the pandemic, we had 7 believers who went on to join our program. A couple of them have launched and grown their business. The others are figuring out their products, their family businesses. So take a look at those if you're interested. Again, so today we have someone who I have worked with for probably now 5 years, since the days that I was heading operations at Reliance's GeoGen Next, which is the startup initiative. And the first time I remember working with Ezhilan was in YourStory office back in 2016. And we were saying, well, YourStory is doing great. At that time, I think it was like 10, 11 million followers, subscribers, covering stories after stories. It is the go-to place for anything about the Indian startup ecosystem, and has been for me for a very long time. So Ezhilan Baskar has been with YourStory since its early days. I think 7, 8 years now. He's the associate vice president. They don't care a lot about the designations. It's more about the work. And if you've ever worked with Ellie, Ezhilan, you would know that he's someone who's really hands-on. The team is great, the positioning, working for the founder, working for the entrepreneur, getting the story right and positioning it correctly is very, very important. And so, I thought I'd invite Ezhilan to this founders talk because he can probably share a bird's eye view of the Indian startup ecosystem, which is the third largest. The number that I have is about 70, 80,000 startups in India, but you can correct me where I'm wrong. And also, share what you think are the trends or anything about the startup ecosystem in India or outside, right? For those who have joined us, we want to make this interactive. So just drop in as many questions as you can in the Q&A box. Would love to take those questions. Ezhilan, if you allow me, I'll interrupt you for any questions that might be there. But the way we've kind of set this up is Ezhilan is going to run through a presentation very quickly for us. And then we'll have enough time in the second half of this session to go through the questions. But if I get any questions for a particular point, I might just interrupt you and ask you to further expand on that topic, if that's okay with you.
Done, sir. I think done, Darshan. I think format works pretty much. Thank you so much for inviting me. I think let me tell a small story. That's our day-to-day job, right? So me and Darshan, our relationship was a little long back. This is a time where we call it the wave 3 of the Indian startup ecosystem, the big daddy of the Indian corporate ecosystem. Reliance planning to enter the startup scene. So that's when I think we got touched with Reliance as a whole partner, and then initially they showed us a lot of interest in hey, what is the long-term view that can be done in terms of creating the whole ecosystem view, right? So that's where our relationship started. I think it's going on for almost like 5+ years. I think he's moved on to a different set of things in his life, but the relationship continues, and Reliance is also has changed the market by the time where he was an initial team member. Uh, I'm just going to quickly jump into my presentation and also give a little bit of a context, right? So who am I, what I'm doing here, kind of sorts. You're able to see my screen?
Yeah.
Perfect. Just a quick context. I've been with YourStory for almost 8 years now, so joined little early. I was a developer doing a bunch of things right now. So I was pretty much started coding when I was 10th standard. Did my computer science, did my own startup, didn't work out. So then realized this is we are talking about 2011, early stages of the Indian startup ecosystem. This was the time where Sequoia or say Flipkart was all just setting up in India, figuring out what is technology investment is all about. So the first one didn't work out pretty much. The typical challenge when two techies, me and my other co-founder, we thought, hey, we'll build something massive. We thought we were just kept on building for 18 months without realizing what is MVP, what is product market fit, and all those things. That's when I realized at least, hey, I lack a lot of experience in terms of business side of the things. That's when I met Shraddha in one of the hackathons. She was just quit CNBC, started YourStory. I think they were 3 years, I think that time. So I wanted to go for an internship. I was like, okay, let me learn something through the internship. So that's how it started in 2011. Towards the end, 2012, I came as an intern. Pretty much then from there, I think there's no turning back. Touched upon a lot of things. One of the very few, I would say, lucky people in the ecosystem to see that Indian startup ecosystem grown from overnight, from nowhere to that hockey stick curve, which we are talking about. To exactly tell you how it was when I said I'm joining a startup. That time I was did my GRE, so I had like a 320 score, so I had an option to go to US. Same time I got some of the software engineer jobs, which is like the dream of every middle class home. But I said no, all this, and then I was looking for a job in certain different areas, didn't get that too. Then I said I'm joining a startup. My parents thought, okay, really something wrong with our child, so they took me to a psychiatrist. That's the mentality that time when you say you're joining a startup, say 7, 8 years back. So that was the way how the entire ecosystem was pursuing the startup ecosystem. I think from there, I think pretty much we've grown into one of the largest ecosystem in the world. I think three is still, I would say, it's work in progress. We should soon become second, I would say, with the whole the socio-economic scenes that we're seeing and how things are changing. Close to $50+ billion has been invested in the Indian markets. This is through a combination of from early stage to late stage funding, and also the different forms of capital that are investing through the FDI and other formats, which has all gone into directly with Indian startups in different formats. Uh, 30,000 is the, I would say, that technology enabled layer of startups, which we are tracking at YourStory, but the ecosystem is still larger. For example, we have told around 1.2 lakh stories till today in the last 10 years at YourStory, right? So the market is bigger, but what we talk about is like technology and technology enabled companies, right? So that's the key parameter. So in that, we are tracking actively 30,000+ startups. And together, you call it the total market cap, which is like there's a publicly funded market caps. You talk about trillions and this thing. So based on our data, the last map was together the entire startups and non-funded ecosystem is close to a $180 billion market cap, right? So soon, the angle, how the directions from the policy frameworks to the VCs and everything, right? This is going to become a $1 trillion market cap, right? So that's the, I would say, the future which everybody is working towards. Any industry you take, policy framing pretty much and everything, right? So it has the potential and it has the, well, comparing to the other industries, the startup ecosystem is going to grow faster in terms of both job creation and market cap and wealth creation kind of sorts. So this is where we are today, pretty much. Some of the unicorns, pretty much all of you know who's doing what. As we speak, a lot of my data is going to be from 2019 and 2020 because people talk about current, but current is still work in progress, this financial years and everything. So I've gotten the last verified pretty much a year back, which is the last financial year sorts, so that it gives you a different perspective because things are going to change drastically post pandemic. The way how markets are going to pursue, the ways the VC trends and everything pretty much is going to be different. It's not going to be the same playbook that's happening in the market, right? So one of the biggest use cases, education, for example, if you pick up the phone and talk to all the VC firms, 2 years back, they never took a lot of startups that they funded during the pandemic in the education category as a serious ones. Exactly when the pandemic hit in 9 months, 27 education deals we were part of, indirectly covering it or through the sources and everything. People still talk about only Byju's and Unacademy, but there's like 27 education startups funded in that category. So all those theses changed just overnight kind of thing. And to talk about, right, so we all keep comparing ourselves from the Western world or to China to look up to. I think a lot of people are not seeing that, yes, Baiju gets a lot of negative press, but Baiju is the world most valued Indian education company. It's not about just from an India perspective, right? We keep saying, hey, Uber is the largest valued company in transportation and everything. I think the time has come where Indian startups are the most valued companies in certain sectors kind of thing. There are trends which talks about India's consumer internet was never going to come from a social or a search. It might come from education, right? So we never know. The trends are keep changing as we speak because it is still, I would say, day zero in the Indian startup ecosystem. The large value creation and wealth creation, which we keep talk about, is still work in progress 5 to 10 years down the line. The impact that you see what's happening in say US markets or China is still work in progress. Of course, the speed that is happening is changing year on year. If you see some of the startups to become unicorn, say a few years back, for Dhruva it took almost 7+ years, but that's not the case for Ola Electric. Ola Electric become a unicorn in 1.5 years because of the industry and the opportunity and who's doing it kind of thing, right? So those trends of becoming unicorns or trends of creating market cap or trends of access to funding has come down drastically because of two things. One is a cost of creating companies have come down drastically while comparing to 10 years back, and also access to capital. If you talk about it, say 7 years back, when we were actively looking at, say, Series A, Series B deals, that time getting a Series A was a big thing. It took 3 years to close. A Series B will take 5 years to close, right? So pretty much you had only a handful of 10, 15 investors to do those. Today, India has 170 investors as we speak, and there's close to $4 billion sitting in dry powder. We call it dry powder, where the money is there, but trying to find the right team to write the check, right? So access to capital has become drastically, I would say, available and accessible and can happen faster. There are founders whom we know in a span of 2 years do Series B, right? So that's the rate the fundings are happening in the Indian scene. So the next one's the Soonicorns, which is like work in progress towards unicorns, right? So India has close to 50 plus Soonicorns, which is some of them might have become already unicorn as we speak. Data are. If you talk about the sectors that's happening in, right? So consumer internet, e-commerce, some of the trends that we have to talk about is also e-commerce as a trend is done in India in terms of large capital, because the market consolidation is happening between, it's going to be the game of Walmart versus Reliance versus say Alibaba was there, but they're also driving in a different thesis in terms of with Amazon and competitions. So the next set of growth is going to happen in logistics, education, and also D2C is a huge theme right now. If you see sugar, cosmetics raised huge $21 billion last week. So you will see a lot of FMCG and D2C category growing heavily in terms of funding. But this is what the categories which got funded, and you can see the founding years. As we speak, the companies and the founding dates are changing. Earlier, it took 10 years to become a 400 million valuation. Some of the companies today, that's becoming and happening in. Say the reason also why Urban Ladder is here. We just want to give you the trend, how much when they started and when exits are happening. They were valued at unicorn stocks, right? So the I would say earlier, if you take 4 years to do a Series A, now it's becoming 2 years. So the trends are changing as we speak. Some of the topmost VCs. Again, I've taken 2019 as a benchmark because of the number of deals and everything. Things are changing. As I said, Sequoia is, of course, one of the most, I would say, the founding fathers for the Indian startup ecosystem in terms of venture capital, at least. They were in the US and other markets. If a lot of people, for first timers, Sequoia almost owns $2 trillion. The fund companies that they've funded indirectly owns $2 trillion in the Nasdaq market cap, right? So that's the scale that we're talking about. Airbnb, Uber, and you take in India, they have Byju's to almost whomever you name, some of the most successful startups being funded by Sequoia, Axel, Bloom, for example, some of the most founder-friendly funds from Bombay, I think. And also one more trend that you see is also it's not just any more homegrown funds. What has happened in the last 3 years at least, post-pandemic things are going to be slightly changing, but access to capital, not just from an Indian fund perspective, a lot of global funds You take BNext from a Japanese ecosystem perspective, is actively investing in most of the deals. I was shocked to hear some of the numbers. They've already done 20 deals in the span of last 1 year, right? So the numbers keep changing, kind of thing, right? So uh, BNext, or you take Korea, for example, we work with a lot of investors from the Korean ecosystem because the hardware access to hardware startups and the ecosystem is very less in India. So we are working with a bunch of partners from both the government perspective and also investor perspective to support the hardware ecosystem, because we don't see still a unicorn, homegrown unicorn in terms of hardware. You take electric vehicle is still work in progress. Of course, Ather is there as the known brand, but the extended ecosystem around it is still work in progress, I would say. So that's where the trends are changing. Again, what's driving all this, right? So a lot of people keep saying we call it the Indian startup story into three phases. We call it phase one, which is Tiger Global and SoftBank. Or in 2012 and 2013, right? So this was a time where Flipkart and Unmobi and some of these guys, when they were looking at raising capital at a large scale, because the road to profitability, the road to an IPO was a longer format. If for some people, to give a context on the IPO markets, India, if you still see, we never had a single successful IPO for a homegrown company at $1 billion valuation, right? So it's all sub 100 billion. Of course, Make My Trip and all of them have gone into successful IPOs. But if we talk about pure play tech and the local IPO market is still work in progress. You don't have access to those large cash flow because the way how the Indian IPO market works is completely different from what a US listing happens, right? So if you take the just to give a simple explanation, right? So you can't list a company in India if you're not profitable for more than 3 years, and you need to have a minimum threshold kind of thing. 99% of the startups won't fit into their criteria. That's the reason they can't list in the Indian markets. But that's not the rule in the US and other exchanges globally, right? So then what happens is you need large capital, and then if you are in the large, I would say, cash burning businesses, you need, it's going to take longer time kind of stocks, right? So that's when we had more investors like Tiger and SoftBank came in, where you had access to large capital and the appetite to wait for some more time slots, right? So that's, we call it, I would say, the phase one, which took off the end, and I would say the tragedy in terms of the growth and the scale. Phase two is going to be again, which we call it pretty much the uh, policy wave. When we talk about registering a company earlier, I don't know how many of you have done here. Registering a company, it's a lengthy process. It takes 2-3 weeks. None of us can do it alone. We need a CA or somebody. Uh, this is when 2012, when the new government came in, and then officially there was a startup policy for the nation for the first time, right? So during that process, we were part of that entire team, which was in the that time, Mr. Nirmala Sitharaman used to be the Commerce Minister, Mr. Amitabh Kant used to be the Secretary of DIPP. So there was a whole team was assembled in terms of setting up the policy for the nation for the first time from a startup ecosystem perspective. Uh, that policy was designed in a way that not just from an investor traction perspective, pushing the wave of entrepreneurship across the nation, from not just from a tier one perspective, tier two, tier three, right? So that's when there was a huge, I would say, not an acceptance. We saw a surge of, say, average every year we used to see 4,000 to 5,000 new companies getting started. Post that, the number became 20,000, right? So just that one wave across, it took almost 18 months to, I would say, get adopted in all the state governments, and they all started pushing the policy in terms of initiatives and implementation on different formats. But that did put startups at the mainstream, where everybody started taking startup very seriously in terms of, from government also engaging startups as their customers, to every scene from a corporate perspective, and all those things, right? So that's, we call it like phase two of the big push that happened to the startup ecosystem. And phase three is the geo wave, right? So, okay, funding is sorted, policies have come in place where everybody's accepting and everything, right? So, but infrastructure is one of the key challenges when you try to build internet companies, right? So you need massive user base. Good part, there are pros and cons on the Indian ecosystem, pretty much being 1.3 billion customers, I would say customers in terms of population, which is equal to the customers, which becomes the opportunity. But how do you reach them at scale digitally, right? So you needed those infrastructure where the users are there. That time the cost of data was too high. Or almost the Indian market was like started at 7 million users. That's the opportunity. That was also pretty much in broadband.
eventually post Geo, it's like almost the entire market is changed. I would say overnight is even still an understatement, right? So on that wave, the entire ecosystem was riding to the next set of growth, right? So which led a lot of consumer internet startups, not just from India perspective. Google had a huge user surge in terms of YouTube and other products kind of thing, right? So that led the next phase where saying, hey, in digital ecosystem, you can build scalable products and scalable model sorts, right? So this is, we call it the phase 3 of Geo. Parallelly, there were some of the other things also was working around. Say, the way I would say, there's a joke which we keep exchanging between the VCs and some of the founders and also the closed door community, right? Most of the money all the e-commerce startups raised went in educating the consumer how to purchase online or how do you transact online, right? So we keep saying, hey, discounts are so good. We're saying, oh, this is not going to break even because they keep discounting. But a lot of people are not realizing what Flipkart or an Amazon or say a lot of internet startups was doing, the wave one startups, which you call them. The entire money raised just went in talking about, hey, how do you transact? How do you purchase? How do you, in terms of do delivery, right? So that's where a lot of innovations like COD and everything Flipkart came up with. So now today, there's a huge sizable chunk of users who knows how to transact. That's where now Swiggy's of the world and everybody's riding on the next wave, where they can see that surge in span of 2-3 years because uh, at scale, lot of it's so easy as a individual to comment on everything and have a view on everything in terms of when you're sitting and reading news about startups doing this or this person is doing this and everything. But at different stages, the challenges were different. I would say even till today, yes, despite I'm saying, hey, this is one of the most sexiest market, there's too much money available and everything. There are changes at this scale right now, right? So where in terms of once you attain a readable, I would say a mass scale, still whether you're break even as a business, no, the cash burn is still happening, kind of thing, right? So then they're building an extended ecosystem around it. You will see a lot of bloodbath in terms of consolidation. There is India at one point there were like 23 payment banks, sorry, not payment banks, open banks and everything, right? So there are a lot of those things are there, but there's a set of consolidations also happening and everything, right? So you have to give it to Geo and the vision of the entire Reliance Group. I would say in the span of time that the cost of data has become so cheap, which opened up the market kind of sorts. And the other factor around it, with more, I would say, users and more access to the markets, eventually money, then comes the layer of reaching the users, privacy, and protecting the interest of the consumer, right? So how do you do that at scale? That's when the entire cashless stack, UPIs, payments, right? So all this also further added to the ecosystem kind of thing. Today, if you don't have an UPI, imagine the life, say 4 years back, say if you have to, or take pandemic as a use case today, right? So if you don't have any of the apps that we are using, how you would have done a transaction with a local merchant wala, right? So it's not impossible. It's not possible, right? So eventually, if you see a lot of use cases which was getting built were even more effective during the lockdown when the situation that we're facing in kind of sorts, right? So cashless, the entire infrastructure, what worked around this entire area from payments, healthcare infrastructure that is getting built in, or one of the biggest transformation the Indian banking industry is going through is the API-led transformation that are happening in, right? We are still facing, we are in 2021, HDFC, I don't know how many of you use HDFC here, it was down last week, right? So it's things are at scale, things are breaking kind of sorts, right? So all this are today, or opportunities also one way to see it. Startups are solving it pretty much. The traditional banks are getting disrupted kind of thing, right? So all this is leading to those innovation at a cost of convenience to the consumer kind of thing, right? So let's talk about exit. I think we spoke a lot on where the market is headed, but one of the biggest questions is where is the money or where is the investor outcomes happening, right? As I earlier said, the IPO market is still very early, but what's going to happen is you will see a huge wave in terms of a lot of Indian companies. There are around close to 8 to 9 companies soon going to be listed in the US markets. Earlier, there was a rule which is getting, again, it's work in progress, where if Indian company is going to list in the US markets or any other exchange, you have to do dual listing kind of sorts, right? So those things are changing as we speak. There's a draft agreement with Ministry of Finance. I think Finance Minister has already told in the one of the parliamentary session it's getting removed and everything, but there are still some clarification expected. As I said, this is not a confirmed information, but still work in progress kind of thing. Anybody wants to catch up further and discuss, happy to answer that further. So that rule change is going to enable today. There's a huge set of startups are in line to list in the US markets, which will again give them the time and access to those deep pockets to reach that certain scale. They might enter globally in different markets and do those things. But the local IPO market is still work in progress. It's going to take time. But there are a few successes that we are seeing in the small startups like E2E Networks, for example, went live in the SME exchange of NSE, National Stock Exchange. With BSE, if you see last week, Sequoia had 2 IPOs, but mostly around consumer, I would say consumer brands. Stovecraft went for an IPO, and then there was another brand called Indigo Paints, right? So which went for an IPO kind of thing, right? So slowly the success stories are happening. These 2 IPOs, what I'm talking about, just went live last week as we speak. Right, so big exits for Sequoia had like, I think, I don't know what's the number of returns and everything, but we have not seen those large IPO markets like what happened in USA. Uber went for a $70 billion valuation and everything. We're not seeing that in India yet. Uh, that's one side. I think, as I said, it's going to take some more time. But what's happening in the M&A side of things, right? So again, M&A, people have to understand why an M&A is happening or an acquisition is happening. Say, why Flipkart was bought by Walmart, or you talk about, say, why today Unacademy is acquiring companies, right? So we keep hearing Unacademy in news. They did almost 20 acquisitions in the span of 12 months, right? So each has its own thesis and own way of reading the market. People sometimes we don't see that. Whether, again, I call it 3 ways, right? So one is a market-led acquisition, other one is a talent-led acquisition, other one is more on the, say, expansion spree, right? So that's how M&As are seen from the lens of both the people who's paying that big buck and also the people who are getting sold kind of stocks, right? So let's take, for example, the Flipkart deal. I'm going to come to that shortly. What is meant to the ecosystem or the investors when it comes to the Flipkart deal, right? So there are 2 ways to decode the Flipkart deal, seeing it from different perspectives. Say this is just my point of view. As I said, we still don't know what is reality, what happened in the site. We are just talking about publicly available information, each of them, right? So Flipkart was almost one of the largest exit that has happened in the consumer internet history, not just from an Indian perspective, right? So whatever the $1 billion check was written is never, I would say, happens in a decade of, say, 5-10 deals happens globally in the world. It's never purely a cash exit, right? So you would have seen in US a lot of stock exchange deals where swapping companies, for example, Dell and EMC had like almost $70 billion, if I'm not wrong, right? But that was more of a stock exchange. Nobody has that much of cash to write lectures, right? In US, you will see some, even this type of pure play cash is very few deals. But what is in it for Walmart, right? For Walmart, if you see from a Walmart lens perspective, people might say, hey, this much of amount and everything, they just generated in a day's time. $17 billion, which they've written for them, it's a one-day stock exchange jump if they just announce a feature or just say, hey, 1% growth and kind of thing, right? So from a Walmart lens perspective, the cash or the valuation, I would say for them, they can just create the money what they've invested in a span of overnight in their stock exchange as a market cap kind of thing, right? But for them, India is more of a long-term strategy growth, right? So how do you win in the market? There are regulations, there are local competitions and everything, but for them, they've tried entering India 2 times before. It didn't work. They were in the large retail play, but e-commerce was, even in US, they missed the e-commerce way. But if you still see, Amazon still handles only 10% of the US retails, right? Still 90% is spread across 3 other retailers, Walmart being the number 1, both from an India and a global perspective, right? So they did crack US in terms of e-commerce. They were just getting started with Jet acquisition in US and everything, right? So that was a time where they've taken this call from a long-term bet perspective and also from an investor's perspective. Axel, or you take all the investors who you can just see on the right side, who all the investors who's invested on the Flipkart team, right? Everybody made money eventually. We keep cursing SoftBank is saying, hey, no, SoftBank is, what SoftBank is doing? SoftBank made almost like 2x returns. In 1 year, they had like a 2x return on the Walmart Flipkart deal kind of thing, right? So everybody made money, which in terms, not just from an investor perspective, there's a whole thread going on, right? So Flipkart mafia. People inside Flipkart, yes, there's a huge set of people who are still waiting for the Flipkart IPO that's going to happen in the US soon. Will make even more money than what it is today. But there was an initial set of people who worked in Flipkart from day 1, or even Sachin and Benny, everybody made money, right? What they're doing in returns, they're deploying those money back in the market as investors or angel investors, or they're all starting companies kind of such, right? Which is creating the next set of wave in the market, right? So exits are happening. It's a good thing what happened Flipkart, which is in terms of creating more investments. So what Flipkart is more, you have to see it from a market led. It's more of acquiring a new market, say acquiring next 40 million, sorry, 300 million customers, not even 30, 40 million, right? So that's the long-term view what Walmart and Flipkart deal you have to see it from. Second is, how many of you have heard about Gojek? I don't know. Gojek is one of the largest Southeast Asia's unicorn. Uh, till I would say 3 months back, their CTO was an Indian. They have a huge development center in India, pretty much. Their first tech team was built by acquiring an Indian service company, which was run by two Indian founders, kind of sorts, right? So who was eventually become their CTO. Now he's Ajay. I don't know how you might have heard Ajay Gore. It was a service-led acquisition because in Southeast Asia, the challenge is they have a huge market of 650 million users. Slowly, the same thing what's happened in India 5 years back is happening in the SCA as a region, but there's no available tech talent in terms of locally, right? So access to large talent and very deep, I would say, sector-led talents also, right? So that's when India is becoming a hotbed in terms of what talent as an access kind of source, right? So it was a small acquisition. Nobody knows that team they eventually build it from, I would say, I think they joined at the Series A time. So then eventually they have like an 800 people development center. India is becoming one of their key markets to build the entire stuff. They're building from here for the entire SCA users kind of sorts, right? So that's one. And how many of you uses Google Pay here? Again, I'm not able to see it. Right. So, okay. Google did an interesting acquisition called Hali Labs some time ago, 3 years back. The guy Pankaj used to be the founder of Hali Labs, and he had a small 10-member team. Today, that team is the one who's powering Google Pay from an India perspective, right? So a lot of people don't know it. Some of these informations are again, yes, I'm not saying it's publicly available nor verified, but we know that there's all some of the smartest people working on those apps that we are using today, kind of sorts, right? So Google Pay is like the number 2 or number 3. That number keeps changing in terms of the most used apps. And the Google Pay experiment, what Google did in India, is becoming now a global use case. This is what Sundar Pichai has said long back, saying, hey, India is becoming the hotbed in terms of experimenting because from India now we'll ship products globally, kind of thing. Google Pay was officially launched in US during pandemic. They never had Google Pay in US for the first time. The way how we transact, in fact, you go to US or other markets, payment is still a challenge, some of the markets. Credit card penetration is high, but the usability or the simplicity that we have in terms of apps is still, I would say, some of the markets globally is still lacking in terms of the payment experience, right? So the teams that are building here, so this is all like talent-led acquisitions, which are becoming IP-led, which are becoming hardcore talent from India shipped to the global markets. That's those type of M&As are happening. Here it's the deal sizes are average between 5 to 15 millions. Of course, the numbers are different. I'm just bringing in a cumulative average, gives our view what we have seen last 7-8 years. Or other one is now you'll see higher to grow faster, right? So I'm talking about Udaan, CureFit, and Academy, right? So this is all like category-led expansions that are happening in. For example, CureFit acquired a lot of startups in different. It started as a gym, then they're into food, then they're right now entering apparel, different category sorts, right? So so there's a mother brand, and then eventually they're acquiring small startups to grow into category, build the initial founding teams, and make them in the leadership position, kind of thing, right? So those type of category expansions and M&As are happening a lot. And Academy, for example, they started with certain courses in certain segments. Today, to enter into new markets, they're doing a lot of M&As, kind of thing, right? So it's all creating indirectly, I would say, a lot of millionaires. I would say at least people are making between 3 to 6 crores average kind of sorts, which is also a good thing that's happening in the market. Not everybody is making that, but eventually all these are leading to, I would say, indirect wealth creation, indirect future set of founders coming in, because the second time founders is a huge thing. For example, a lot of people who have given successful exits are coming back and starting, which is a good thing for it, right? So earlier that was not the same 10 years back. Not anymore. Also failing is I would say one of the things what exits or at least acqui-hires have led is like you're not completely a failure or shutting down the companies, kind of thing, which gives anymore, I would say failure is not a bad thing, is what people started accepting failures, right? So all these are changing those mentalities, kind of sorts, right? And other exits, I'm talking about a little bit old exits, right? So again, talking about exits, again, we can't miss talking about Jio. Jio has been again an integral part what they've shaped in the last 4 years. It's 71 plus companies indirectly, which is part of the programs. Reliance way of seeing it. I keep telling people whenever I need inspiration, I just go 2 days to Navi Mumbai, just experience the scale that's happening in. whenever I feel low, I keep telling these people the scale at what they're operating in, and pretty much I'm just going to come, right? So every category possible, right? So today, during the pandemic, if you've watched the entire AGMs and everything, right? So you will know what's happening, because I have the fortunate view of working with some of the startups and the thing. So from a conversation perspective, haptic, you take payments, you take what's Geo is almost partnering with startups in all categories, right? So some are through acquisition, some are through partnerships, some are through different formats that they're doing, kind of thing, right? So education, for example, Embed is one of the biggest deal what Reliance has done in the market, right? So which is leading. Or haptic, for example, the entire Reliance Geo's commerce angle is where haptic and the Facebook deal, right? So a lot of people has to see it from that angle, pretty much how acquisitions are today empowering the next set of category of businesses that you want to do, kind of thing, right? It's more build, partner, acquire, right? So that's the strategy what Reliance is following, kind of thing, right? So which is now incrementally what US companies used to do a lot of Indian companies have started adopting, because 7-8 years back, partnering with the startup, the Indian corporates used to think 10 times. It takes 2-3 years to even sign them as a contract for a customer base, right? From there today, which is where my next set of presentation is going to come in, where I'm just going to skip all this, right? So MNCs and the local Indian home companies, right? Partnering with startups through accelerator programs to POCs and everything, right? So it's come a long way. For example, for us, it took almost 4 or 5 years to sign some of the big customers. Today, that's not the case. Today, you want to work with Shell, or you want to work with Cisco, or you want to work with, say, SAP. They have dedicated programs where a small startup, which is 6 months old or 1 year old, does not matter. If you're able to get through the programs, you get access to some of the top-notch talent. You get into their entire ecosystem to resell your products and everything, right? So this is where I would say today I know some startups who has almost made like $1 million, $2 million checks through POCs, through accelerator programs. This was not there before, right? So earlier working for a small, or I just see it from an access perspective. Say you're a founder sitting in Pune, or say Chhattisgarh, right? You build a product. One of the biggest challenges, hey, how do I pitch my product to Target, or how do I pitch my product to Cisco? Because I have a use case to solve. Earlier, there was no way, unless until you know some cousin who works at Cisco, he connects you with this thing, or you have to just cold call, or you find people at events. That was the format which we used to get customers for, right? But that's not the case anymore. So accelerator programs have also brought a lot of, I would say, they're one of the key pillars who's driving the ecosystem forward, at least in the early stage ecosystem. Uh, uh, I've had the privilege to work with pretty much all of them. Each of them are also sector specialists in the industries that they are in. Gives a lot of depth to the founders, and which now I think people like Darshan are taking this wave to universities, which is most needed. So I think campus-led is one of the biggest use case. The average age of starting up is coming down a lot drastically. To see OYO or anything. So I think there's a lot of work has to be done still at a campus level, but at least this side the things are getting mature kind of sorts, right? So that's where we are, I would say. I think I'll take a pass here because I think I would have spoken a lot. We'll open up for questions now.
Perfect. Hey, thanks. That was awesome, Ellie. Guys, you can put in your questions in the Q&A box. Thanks for joining us again. This is a power pack session. As you can see, there's so much information, there's so much experience and insights about the Indian startup ecosystem. And we've got Ellie over here who can, share that with us. He's very open. I've always found him to not necessarily, sugarcoat it as well. So while these guys share their questions, I do have a question for you. We see, access to capital was a big challenge previous to 2014. After that, a lot of funds have come through. Then in 2018, there was a early stage capital challenge, right? So pre-seed and seed. Now, there are a bunch of funds that have come through and have tackled that. The time to raise funds, right, is still a few months, if not, a few weeks, right? So, and that depends on, there's a trend, right? I mean, the ones who invest, they know, okay, abhi ye fashion mein hai, whether it's healthcare, whether it's ed tech, whatever it is. And it kind of typically lasts, what I've noticed, between 3 months to 6 months. So can you share a little bit about how to identify, what do investors look for? Or what is coming up next? Say if we were looking at 2021, I know we don't have a crystal ball. I know, we don't have privileged access to some of these investors. But how would you go about to say, well, how do I identify over 170 investors, but I want to cut down my time from, say, 6 months, 9 months to 3 months to raise this fund? So, because
Well,
funding is the first question that typically most guys ask, right?
I got I'm going to do a counter view to it. Given a choice, don't raise money at all first. I will start there.
Agreed.
Just to give a context, right? So we were bootstrapped for almost 7 years. Your story was a bootstrap profitable company for the first 7 years. Shraddha was the sole founder running it all alone, and we were making 50% of EBITDA for the first few years because we were a very lean team. But at the same time, the market, what we were doing was it was having a steady growth sorts, which we had the privilege not to raise money kind of thing for some time. But we eventually raised Series A and Series B, and things are changed right now. Um, my first advice, at least from my experience, whatever I've seen from both founders to everything, right? So I keep telling people, you have to see it from just keep see most of the time there's a context to it. I'm just going to tell, right? So what we are reading, what we are consuming as a content is something work in progress for almost 6 to 12 months. Today you're talking about somebody's raised money, or today you're talking about somebody's hey raised this volume. This the work has happened almost a year back, or I keep quoting this everywhere. Jeff Bezos tells you, see, hey, if you had a good quarter, this quarter doesn't mean that you celebrate because it is the karma of the past 2-3 quarters ka hard work that has happened, or a year, 2 year back, the strategy or the direction that you're taking, right? So most of the time, I would recommend people like, hey, don't see it from what's happening because you have to be a part of the trend to understand it detailedly. So first don't get glorified or just don't get this thing that comfort with the seeing all the funding announcement that's seeing because there's a lot of things goes behind it. I keep telling a journey of startup is like this, right? So it is you're expected to deliver T20 results with the test cricket market with Ranji Trophy players, right? So sometimes you want to do 100 things, the market doesn't move, you won't have the right people to do and everything, right? So that's the journey of an entrepreneur today. Or you take myself, right? So I joined when I was almost 19 years old. Got access to early to see the ecosystem and everything. For me as an individual to, I would say, to grow, it took certain amount of time, and there's no playbook to be in the entrepreneurship or in a fast growing startup. So I keep calling it. Ours was more of a rocket. Till today, I'm still like 9 years. Still things are not done. I keep learning more because it's never ending. The learning is never ending. Every day there's a new challenge, kind of, right? So when it comes to funding, also the same lens, I would say, because it might look like all the funding news and everything sexier, it gives you glory and everything. Given a choice, one, never raise money, right? So unless and until you are in large markets, and if you're a first-time entrepreneur, and then the market needs, I mean, to build that business, you need large capital. Then again, take a view in terms of what is needed, where the market is heading, and everything, right? So those perspectives, because I will never say, a lot of people comes to me for an introduction to an investor. I won't do it immediately. For me, it's like whether it makes sense, both the sides, what stage they are in and everything, right? Because we know the psyche of investors pretty much on the side, what they're looking at and everything. Because eventually investors are also, please understand, they are also bank lenders. They also have to return their money. It's not like they're going to be with you in a relationship forever, like the family or how your fathers are committed, right? So for them, there's a cycle. Early stage investors have to return their money to their LPs back in 3-4 years. I would say late stage has a cycle of 10 years, kind of, right? So when you're choosing investors or when you're looking at raising money, don't purely see what the investment that you need from a capital perspective, but what is the return that you're going to give to them and what is that cycle is going to take, right? So bring in those factors in, right? But yes, it is easy to raise money. I'm not going to say no to it. Today, for example, I've seen people just in a span of 6 months closing Series A, span of say 2 months closing 20 angels, all the big names in the cap table. Some people are getting lucky, and this is a good thing actually because eventually, despite everything, you need a little bit of luck. I would still say it's a combination of hard work, timing, luck. Everything comes together because most of the time it's not like everybody gets it. Hardly even 0.01% makes to the name, because we talk about 30,000 startups, hardly only 3,000 is funded today, right? So it's 10% already. And then from that, how many goes to the next level? How many sustains as a 10-year-old company first of all, right? So I would recommend, say, there's an interesting book. I'll just send it to everybody, right? So
It's whether if you're going to start looking at building companies in terms of funding based on venture capital, no, don't see it from that lens perspective always, right? So whether you want to build a company which even stays after you not there alive, right? So that's the angle if you want to take it. Or if you're looking at a short term, that's the view you have to take in kind of sorts, right? So just get that correct first and then think through from an investor perspective, because money is there, because if you're able to get those answers correct, you will be able to meet your investor on your own. It's not like when to raise what. I would say that I myself would have asked this question 1,000 times in the span of 9 years. There's no correct answer to it, but I would say given a choice, don't raise money. But if you want to raise money, just see it from this lens. Investors will come chase you kind of sorts.
Perfect. So we've got some good questions, a lot of good questions come through. So we'll try to keep the answers short if that's all right, Ezhilan. Here's a question by Neha Jain, and I'm going to augment it a little bit. You're a startup, early stage, you need customers, revenue from customers is better than investment or money from investors. We've established that, right? And so you're bootstrapping. So without raising, how do you build your brand? How do you get the visibility? How do you get the positioning? And this is with the point of view of, maybe even how YourStory has been doing this, right? The whole ethos of YourStory is to tell the story of the founders and, let people know from a small village what founder is doing what, right? So would love to hear your thoughts around, if today you are building, you're an early stage, you're bootstrapped, how would you build your credibility? Because that credibility also helps in getting customers. And then if you are playing the VC game, you can raise funding for growth.
So I think bootstrapping it differs from sector to sector and the market to market. But what I've seen, at least from my experience, right? So you as a founder becomes a brand for everything, kind of thing, right? So you are selling all the time. You're selling to investors, you're selling to customers, you're selling to people to join your company, kind of thing. So eventually, I would say you have to create your own identity in terms of, I'd say four personas, right? So who's the extended ecosystem? Pretty much, you have to see it from right now. The things are a little changed. Those days, it's all about attending events, meeting people at different formats, kind of thing, right? And then writing content and blogging. That was initial way of, I would say, building your extended ecosystem, where that comes through networks and referrals, kind of sorts. That used to be there. Today, the things have changed where I would say if you're building on internet first companies, things have become more simplified, right? So for example, I know it differs again category to category. I'm just bringing in a bunch of examples. There's no one answer to it, kind of thing, right? So today I know D2C brands today are completely bootstrapped and cash positive, just doing Instagram ads, right? So they've clearly defined their TG, saying, hey, I'm going to sell, this is what is my 1 or 2 product catalogs, and this is my TG, experiment with a small budget and then go double down on it, kind of thing. Sometimes getting that correct, we as an entrepreneur tend to do too many things, saying, hey, I have to do this, I have to do this, survive, kind of thing, right? No, some of the biggest growth hacks we have seen is simplify things, what you want to do, what you're offering. With internet, there are enough tools that are coming where you can drive a profitable business, kind of thing. Or other options today, lending, for example, has become a big use case. A lot of people don't leverage this effectively. You have a number of banking options have come in. There's another type of funding. I don't know how many of you know is debt capital is available today if you want to raise money, kind of stuff, right? So if you raise a certain critical mass, 1 million, 2 million customers, debt is there available as a funding where you don't need to dilute too much as a company sorts, right? It's more on a certain commitment, kind of thing, right? Those are all the forms of funding is available. Second, I would say, again, it's from our journey, invest in people very early and then see a long-term view, right? So some of the people have surprised us a lot, which kept us going. For example, uh, there are 2 types of people you will see always. One is who's sticking to what the core job is, they'll do the job and go. But there are always people who goes for an extra mile, right? So that matters a lot. Sometimes people who seeing the long-term growth with you, right? That is defined because those people have went and hacked a number of strategies. If you want to do cold calling, if you want to do 10 number base kind of thing, right? So people is one of the core, I would say, in bootstrapping journey, you might not be able to pay them a lot, but eventually your business scales, kind of thing, right? So find growth hackers or find entrepreneurs. It's okay, right? So sometimes they might outgrow you, they might be over smart in the journey, kind of thing, right? So but see for those talents, those two where like are critical. For example, sorry, I'm just making it a little lengthy. Your Story's first writer was never a journalist. He was a chemical engineer working in TCS. Jubin got bored of entire life, now went to Himalayas and everything for us. It was just a bunch of passionate people, and second writers where an intern came out of BITS Pilani. Varsha used to be there, right? So none of them, or you take. So I was a developer joined, right? So I'm doing sales today, right? So for me, it's sometimes people finding without any agenda kind of thing, right? So invest in people a lot and invest. You have access to funding capital just to sum it up, right? So new forms of funding has come. You don't need to raise fundings always, and in a founder-led brand is always critical. So founder has to be always selling any formats that helps in the long term, creating being the face for the company sorts.
Absolutely. I'm a chemical engineer by background and I don't do anything about chemical engineering today, right? I'm in technology, I'm in education, and then I'm trying to build Dasar right now. So absolutely, let interest drive your actions and just build on it. So here's a question by uh, uh, Haragovind Singh. Okay, he operates, I think, in the Indian arts and craft sector, and is curious about, how do you go about building the best outreach or marketing, branding, positioning for such a startup out of India, and also maybe from an investment standpoint. So I'm going to modify that a little because we also have a couple of other founders like Sanjana Pai, who operates in the female hygiene product, right? And we've got some amount of funding in there, but she's completely bootstrapped and building as well. And then her Govind is, operating in the arts and crafts. So there are those sectors which are more niche in nature. So how do you build a brand? How do you think about it from the short term, long term standpoint, and then an investment standpoint?
Got it. Thanks, Darshan. I think just let me take the first one, right? So on the hygiene, right? So menstrual hygiene is a huge space still, but you've not seen a successful company that scales. It's still a challenge as a space. But of late, what has happened is last 3-4 years, we have seen a lot of impact funds coming in supporting those initiatives, and also both from a government perspective, Ministry of Child and Healthcare, Ministry of NCW, for example, is doing a lot of work, and we are doing some work with UNDP also on driving awareness around the space. There's a lot of opportunity has come, which is more organically you can promote, not just from a brand perspective and funding and support. So there is few startups whom we are working closely also in terms of visibility and everything. But today, from procuring in terms of, right, so today people are supporting those startups in terms of procuring at mass scale, and then how do you create that as a movement kind of a thing. Please feel free to connect her with us. I will just maybe catch up offline, also have a chat with her and open up and do the connections, because you talk about it's still last status. We did a survey with some of the startups. We have a brand called Makers, which we operate purely for in terms of talking about the such stuff for women, in terms of empowering women, be the voice for women. Last survey was said there's still 200 million people in the country, I mean, women who don't have access to menstrual hygiene products, right? And also we are doing some work with PNG, we are doing some work with some of the other brands who wants to support these initiatives, also support the local ecosystem pretty much. There's a lot of work happening. It just sometimes a lot of people are not aware of it. So please feel to connect with us. We'll take it forward. And on the arts and crafts, right? So it's again, people like being culturally aligned, but it's the most ignored and untouched market, I would say. But of late, there's a lot of traction. There's a startup called Vende, which is curating, which is like an e-commerce portal for all the local artisan stuffs they're crafting. So they're raising a big round right now, right? So eventually now that's becoming mainstream. And today you talk about, I'll give you simple use cases. Again, I'm not promoting any products, but today from a scale perspective, technology tool adoption has become simple. Like WhatsApp for Business, we know entrepreneurs who are selling 3-4 crores just using WhatsApp for Business apps. She doesn't have an e-commerce portal, she doesn't have a social media page and everything, just simply WhatsApp for Business. All she does is, I have 200 people in my network, I will send one saree picture, how many of them likes it, I just send the payment link. Razorpay is again used, or enough payment apps have come in. Simple use cases, this is all not some rocket science tools kind of thing, right? So in arts categories, always two challenges. One is driving technology adoption at scale. Today there is enough tools is there. The second piece is more around brands, marketing and everything. I have to again go back from trying to answer it in the more optimal way. I have to bring those use cases. Today, from an internet perspective, internet is the only way where you can achieve scale selling through internet at a mass this thing. So if you're doing traditional marketing and building a massive offline presence and retail presence of driving is going to take a lot of time and access to a lot of, you need access to a lot of capital. More efficient ways, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Instagram and YouTube ads. And off late, we are seeing a lot of success in terms of regional campaigns through shared chat, and a lot of local commerce apps are coming in pretty much. Those can be the effective tools that are there, where with effective techniques where you don't need a large tech team or a a marketing team. With 1 or 2 people, you can achieve scale through those products. And also government is now with MSME ministry and others, they have dedicated funds in terms of supporting this similar ecosystems. Happy to connect them through there, also open up those opportunities kind of thing.
Awesome. Thank you. I will connect you to Sanjana as well. So here's a question by Praveen Parmar, and this is very specific to your story. And he's asking about the business model. And do you charge a startup for stories or for publishing? So maybe what you could do is, if someone is interested, I'll make it a little broader. If someone wants its story out through YourStory, how do they approach you? How do you cover their stories? What's the best way to engage with your story if you are an organization or a brand, if you don't mind sharing?
Got it. I think this is the most asked use case in the last 2-3 weeks. Also, a lot of people keep asking us. I'll give you I'll tell you what, there's a little story, right? So we are 150 people in that. Currently, we are a 150 member team. In that 70-80 of them are journalists who are actively writing stories, focusing on different. So we operate a bunch of brands. The core YourStory is still focusing on the startup ecosystem, talking about early stage stories to all the way to late stage stories. Then we have a brand called SMB Story, which is purely focusing on digital first SMBs, right? So not technology led startups, but SMBs who are trying to adopt digital. How do we make them sexier kind of sorts, right? So when 10 years back, we started talking about startups, startup market was not that sexier, right? So nobody was even interested in. So the whole story of founding YourStory by Shraddha used to work with CNBC and Times. That time, no mainstream media was ready to focus on startups, right? So they were all talking about Future Bazaar and everything. When Flipkart and InMobi founders were reaching out and saying, hey, you're not big for us to cover. That's when she quit and started YourStory, right? So that time, it was just purely started out of passion. And then she said, all these guys are going to go become big, right? So similarly, then we are in the women as a category. We still feel women as a large ecosystem, still their voices are not heard, the causes are not promoted properly kind of thing. So our journalists are spread across these 3-4 verticals covering stories. The core startup market is covered by 20-30 journalists. On an average a day, we get around 800-900 requests a day for stories. That's the massive scale ecosystem has become, right? Earlier, say 7 years back, I keep asking our team, hey, how have you found the startup? Hey, I met them at that team, or this investor connected, or that person connected, or else we do our own events where we meet a lot of entrepreneurs and our team used to write the stories through that, right? But the scale it has become, today we were not able to cover all the stories. That's the reason what is now happening is, hey, I reached out to YourStory, we're not getting it covered, or is there a way we can get it paid and everything? To answer that question upfront, we never charged any entrepreneurs till today for the stories. If you have charged, we would have never been in the game, because for us, entrepreneur come first. We keep, Shraddha keeps telling this, right? So it's not about revenue first, it's brand first, it's the story first. I'll give you an example, like, again, I'm not going to name a person. So 7 years back, one of the entrepreneurs reached out. He was just 6 months old in the market. He just started with his job. Some in the editorial room, there was a discussion saying, hey, this guy is too early to cover and everything. The angle that Shraddha correctly saying, no, it's not about whether it's too early or where he is, right? Let's tell his story first, because we are not the one to judge where he's going to be or who is he or what he's innovating, right? It's not like 10 years back, we know that Flipkart was going to become big, or funny of Redbus we covered that time. It was a joke that he's building an app for booking tickets. Nobody even believed that use case kind of thing, right? If you're going to judge you guys because of what you are, or because, hey, this market is big, you're so choto, we have never been in the game. So just to again answer it, our approach to the storytelling is always like, what is in it, the story of the entrepreneur and how passionate is it, and tell your story. That's it's as simple as it is. So there is no, I would say, criteria like, oh, you have to be this much revenue, this much funding and everything we cover. No, it's just the sheer scale of story requests that we get. We are not able to cover all the stories. That also we are trying to productize it. So we have launched something called community.yourstory, to bring in different perspectives, to hear voices and bring in more community influencers kind of thing. So if you have a good story, I would say the best angle is to go through networks or my email ID. I'll just ping it here. Just please send it to me. I'll connect somebody in the team. So there is no clear, I would say, criteria sorts. Every story deserves to be told. That's our goal. Say we want to tell billion stories, so we will cover all the stories out there.
Awesome. Thank you. We are just over time. I've always found your story team awesome. That's why I continue working with you guys. The passion that Shraddha, the leadership by Shraddha is absolutely phenomenal. The work ethic and the creativity, the positioning that I've found through you and your team is one of the best that I have seen in the country. So thanks a lot for joining us this session. All of you, thanks for joining us on a Wednesday evening. We have a bunch of things going on for you. One of the things that I wanted to share was also the details. As you can see, your story has covered a bunch of things for us. Which is the Flame University's Center for Entrepreneurship. I've put it in chat if you'd like to read in here. But again, kind of coming back, hey, thanks, Ezhilan. Thanks for joining us for this evening. It's been an awesome session. I hope all of you have found useful. I couldn't get to all the questions. I'm sorry about that. But he shared his email. Feel free to reach out. My name is Darshan Doshi. You can reach out to me via Flame. And we'll see you next Wednesday.
Thank you so much,
Thanks.
Darshan. Thanks everyone for listening. Bye.
Perfect. Thanks. Bye-bye.